Hi everybody, and welcome to week number 7 in our series 10 Values That Build Strong Families. Last Sunday, Pastor Sean spoke to us on the topic of how to affair-proof your marriage, as we looked at this 7th commandment where God says you're not to commit adultery. You're to love only your wife and be committed to her and to your husband. Now, this is a super important subject. It's very important. Because the reality is the ideas and the values that are coming at us from all different directions in our culture do not always agree with what God is saying here. In fact, often they don't. But God realizes what we're like. He knows that human beings, for instance, we are not just physical beings. There's much more to us than just physical and physical love. We're emotional, we're spiritual, and all of those elements, they're all connected and one affects the other. Now when it comes to family, when it comes to marriage, we need to realize some things. Number one, and you've probably heard this before, the family is the building block of society. Do you know a lot of the problems that we see in our country and in our Western culture have to do with the fact that the family is breaking down? And you know, marriage, commitment to one another, when a man and a woman are committed to one another, we need to understand some things. We need to understand that the whole concept of marriage, that was not something that a culture thought up or some society thought up. It was God's idea. From the very beginning, He created us, man and woman, knowing that we were to relate to one another in what we call marriage. And so it was God's idea right from the beginning. Now, in these 10 commandments, and we talked about this at the very beginning of the series, some of these commandments, God says, don't do this. Okay, and this is one of those commandments where God says, don't commit adultery. Now, some people, when they look at that, especially if they have no relationship to God or they've never really looked at what God has to say in the Bible, when they hear don't, they automatically think, well, that's a negative thing. You remember at the beginning of the series, we said that when God says don't, it's always for a positive purpose. The negatives that God gives to you and gives to me, it's for our benefit. And so, as we look at this whole question of marriage, and in particular adultery and unfaithfulness in that whole question, we need to realize that this is a very important topic. There's just a couple things I'd like to point out before you go to your question and discussion time today as a small group, and it's this. When it comes to adultery, when it comes to unfaithfulness in marriage, it always brings pain, and it always tears marriages apart. Now the reality is, all of us who are listening to this, we all come from different backgrounds. Some of us have suffered from the consequences of disobeying this commandment. Some of us maybe have been involved in this. You need to understand that God's grace meets us wherever we're at. But today what I want to talk about, and the approach I want us to take today, is this. What can we do from here on out? How can we be prepared to avoid the wounds and the pain that come from disobeying this commandment? And so the first thing we need to realize, as I said, is this. Adultery always brings pain, and it always tears families apart. The second thing that I'd like you to notice, and I want you to get a handle on this as you apply these principles in your own life, it's this. Adultery, unfaithfulness, never just happens. Okay, it's not like you're walking along one day and boom, you fall in a ditch. Okay, it's not something sudden. It's the result of incremental steps or decisions that take you in the wrong direction. It's not one big step in the wrong direction. It's a whole series of little steps, of small decisions that you make. Now, life is a battle. You need to realize that in life there are forces that come against you, and we're talking about marriages here today. There are forces that come against your marriage. It comes through our culture, it comes through negative thoughts, wrong thoughts that come to our own mind, it comes to our own sinful temptation, because we're all tempted, and God knows this. And God tells us that we are in a battle. what I want for us as your pastor, I want you to be equipped. Just as a soldier, when he goes into battle, he wants to be equipped. He wants to be prepared. He wants to be aware that there is an enemy out there so that he's not knocked down, so that he's not taken out. Because I don't want any of you to ever be taken out in terms of your commitment in marriage. And so what I'd like you to do today is this. In your small group, and you have that on your study sheet, you'll see the instructions. I want you to read about a man named David. David was the king of Israel, and he was God's choice, and God had blessed him, and David had seen God do great things through his life. But at a certain point in his life, when he was king, David made some incremental decisions that were wrong, and it led him to the place where he messed up big time when it comes to this question of adultery. And so today, in your small group, the first thing I want you to do is read 2 Samuel chapter 11. And as you read through that, go through the questions that are on your question sheet, your discussion sheet there. But then as you go through those questions, I want you to come up with, on your own, ideas. How can I affair-proof my marriage? What can I do practically? And what can I learn from this account of David and the mistakes that he learned? I'll tell you what, it's really good to learn from mistakes, but it's much, much better to learn from other mistakes that other people have made. And so I want you to do this today so that you can be prepared for the battle that you will face if you're not facing it already. All right, have a great discussion time, and we'll see you next week. God bless you.